What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Rams Brothers. I'm your host, Dean, and I'm joined, as always, by my brother and the other great host of this show, Nick. And Nick, we have a very special guest joining us. I want all Rams fans to give a very warm Rams Brothers welcome to the Aaron Donald of beat reporting and writing, the very best we've ever had covering the Rams in the history of the organization, Jourdan Rodrigue of The Athletic. Jourdan, how are you today?
I think I just turned like shades of red with that very kind, not accurate, but very kind introduction. Thank you. We always, I don't know if people know this, we're always communicating, we're always like bouncing stuff off of each other and everything. And so I was like, I have to get on with these guys before the summer actually starts, because you guys you approach it in such a good way. You're thorough. You try to give context, and I appreciate the voice that you guys have carved out for this fan base that I think loves to just absorb Rams football all the time. So I'm stoked to be on with you. And congrats again. I said this offline, but congrats again on the birth of your son. That's pretty awesome too.
Thank you. Well, first, we're just trying to follow your lead. And second, we're repping the dad shirt today. So it's a big day for all of us. But Jourdan, we couldn't thank you enough for joining. So as we jump into it, it seems like it's been a month already since we've last jumped on the podcast. But as of recent, the Rams practice days at Cal Lutheran University are now complete, it seemed like it was 5 years longer than they were actually expected to be there. And now they're going to relocate over to Woodland Hills, California, finally. So I wanted to just get your feel as to what the sentiment is from the players and the coaches regarding the relocation, because Sean McVay mentioned privacy at Cal Lutheran, and he also talked about how wind is a little bit of a downside. And we're also very curious if Sean McVay is going to finally have some windows in his office. So let me start with that.
Sean McVay's number one nemesis, everyone thinks it's Kyle Shanahan. It's actually the wind, right? His number one nemesis on this planet is the wind itself, right? And over the last several years, you watch, as the Santa Ana's pick up through the hills and everything, his press conferences get more and more difficult to hear because of how hoarse he gets through the course of the season. The Rams, they didn't have an indoor facility up there. There wasn't room. They had a tent that they installed during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, and they had to have meetings out there. The thing that didn't necessarily click until you actually experienced it was that when the wind would kick up in October, November, the sides of the tent would rattle. And so you're shouting in these meetings. I heard some crazy stuff about play caller contingency plans if he lost his voice ahead of a game day, all of these different kinds of things that were interesting. He said he felt really bad for all the kickers because he had to slice it through these crosswinds. Now, again, it's California. You're not getting weather, but it was, I haven't been up there for a long time. The wind, it was a significant factor when you're trying to do football things and football activities. I think more significant over time. So I'm mixed on I didn't have to basically essentially live there, right? I didn't have to spend 9 to 5 there. I spent a lot of time there, but I wasn't in the same space that all of the people who actually use it as offices are. And there were some space issues. There were some issues. The trail, they were never supposed to be there past 2 years.
Right.
And so it's difficult, I think, to get things built in this region. And so that was a part of the holdup. And then they started catching this momentum where you're going to the Super Bowl. You can't, it's tough when you're that late in the season to then suddenly pick up your operation and then move it somewhere. So this really was a long time coming. I think the slow decay of the buildings and the invasion of the surrounding wildlife was something that I personally will not miss. I will not miss the toilets that roared at you when you flushed them. But what he did say that was very, very important. And I'm curious to see how they'll balance this in Woodland Hills. Woodland Hills, the facility is in the middle of a mall shopping area.
Yeah.
There is no privacy. You are going to, they're going to have to figure out a way to keep operations private, and they probably will build an indoor at some point. It's too hot in the summer there to practice if you don't have an indoor. But I do think that they're going to have to figure that out. That's going to be a challenge, I think, because in Woodland Hills, it's okay, you could go up on the hill behind the practice fields if you so wanted to. However, everybody and their mother could see you standing up there like a lurker. And second, there are snakes, man. There are snakes everywhere up there, and you're not going to want to linger too long up in that area. So it was very private. What I liked about it, it was very humble, obviously, but what I did like about it was it was it was like football, the entire space. That was the only devotion of this area. And that was the only thing you really thought about. The second you would step foot inside the facilities, from the second you would leave, then you'd think about traffic. But you would just think about it. It was so immersive, the point and the ethos of it. I also thought it was kind of, Les always really liked that they won a Super Bowl in like such humble facilities. I will say, multiple things being true, it was not adequate for an NFL team. Sure. And it certainly was, they did their best. The equipment that they had was really high tech and all of that, but the housings and the trappings around it, they had just fallen apart. Bugs coming in, like animals coming in. You just don't ask questions after a certain point. I don't want to know what that hole does. Yeah.
I'm imagining a situation where hawks and snakes are circling kickers when they miss their kicks, right? And
that was very ominous.
Send the animals after the kickers. Yeah.
It was very ominous.
Privacy is a big thing. And when you're installing and all the detail and you want to be able to get your play calls right and be able to communicate, like it's just so incredibly important. And it seems like now with this, hopefully they'll have a legitimate practice facility. Everything will be in place and they can kind of continue to build upon that. So that's great to hear.
Yeah,
I mean, it's going to be fun.
They're like LA's team. It's not like they're the Arizona Coyotes out here. It's like they've been the LA Rams now. They won the Super Bowl. It feels like this is long overdue at this point. So I'm glad that even for you guys too, it's just all improvement.
Yeah, I think I get a cubicle now, like all of us. I think we get like space. So it's funny. I actually, like, again, I know this is like so first world, right? This is not really a problem for me, but it is funny, right? Like I would take phone calls because when you're there, you're also doing interview, like you're talking to agents, you're talking to other people, like all this stuff when you're working in the building, and you're taking these phone calls to like help build and shape your stories. And I would go borrow a player, like some players would take a car service. And like, I remember Bobby Wagner used to let me use his parking space because I would sit on the curb and take my phone calls there because there was nowhere private to do it. And I love Gary Klein to death, but I don't want him to hear who I'm talking to. And so, and so you'd go out, you'd sit there. And it was funny. I was doing that. Trey White came in and he had a car. So he took one of the spaces and I was sitting in the space next door and I was on the phone, but I was kind of sitting like cross-legged on the curb on the phone, but I had my AirPods in and I have hair. So you could not see that I had my AirPods in. And he was like, "Are you meditating over there?" And I said, "No, I'm on the phone. This is actually my office and welcome to Los Angeles. Nice to meet you." So great first impression by me. Yeah.
So something that, I mean, me and a lot of Rams fans, that's kind of like the big thing right now is the Matthew Stafford contract situation. We know McVay wants to keep it in-house, keep it all like tight discussion. But this news broke during the draft back in April. We kind of assumed it would be done by now. Is there anything you can kind of like, give the Rams brothers like a little insider info? And you think Stafford has like a potential new deal open up discussion, for Ernest Jones potentially?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm not surprised that it's dragged on this way and that there hasn't been very much progress made, because if you look at the timeline of how they've historically done stuff like this, OTAs is not usually their timeline on these things. It's usually like training camp. I do think that I know that Rams fans don't necessarily, like I see it in the comments and all that stuff where it's like, stop asking about this. This is not an issue. Like it is an issue, it is an issue. It's been confirmed at this point as an issue. And it is a big deal. And it's something that like my understanding from the organizational perspective is that they want to get something that's mutually agreeable done. Now, I don't know that necessarily would look like, if you're looking at it specifically from the quarterback's perspective, the reporting that was put out there by Ian Rappaport the night of the draft, when he was in his, prior to the first round pick interview, he was talking about he wants more guaranteed money. I think that that's a good starting point to talk about in terms of an adjusted contract. I personally think that it's a little bit of a signal put out there by Matthew's camp, less so Matthew himself, because he has not been made available by the team to speak with us about it. It's a little bit of a signal to me saying, okay, if you're saying you want this guaranteed money, you're sending a signal out there that you do think you'll be playing for a significant amount of time still, because you're saying, hey, I can go and earn this guaranteed money. And the contract in its current state was sort of structured like, hey, the team is not going to be on the hook for anything if this guy isn't playing after 2024. We talked about this last year when we looked at the structure of the weight-bearing wall contracts. 2024 was kind of the year that they were going to have all this stuff put together and really kind of make a push at it. And, you know, like I said, and everyone thought and they were crazy, and except for you guys and like, and perhaps some others, but they were talking out of, you know, this place where we all kind of thought they were unhinged, saying they were going to be better than expected in 2023. And then we actually saw it happen. Yeah. So this was like, okay, the team, the guaranteed money structure right now, and you can hear a helicopter going overhead. Sorry about that.
All good.
Just like, take a moment.
Classic California.
Hopefully nobody needs to be rescued. Hopefully everyone's staying hydrated out there. The contract itself was structured with not the assumption, but the potential that maybe he wouldn't be playing after 2024, or that would be, you know, the last push, or, you know, the last march of the Ents or whatever. I don't know. But it's just like now he's almost sending a signal out saying, I plan to play longer than this. And so I think working through that communication, that's where you're really starting from is, can you do this? You know, and what mutual agreement can you make to not only make the quarterback feel valued? I mean, Matthew Stafford was like a top 5, top 7 quarterback last year, and he was healthy. Year before that, he was not healthy. And the year before that, he had even some injury concerns. And we all see and hear about how much work and extra care it takes to keep him, upright in the season, inclusive to his own toughness and his own preparation, his own work. But the fact of the matter is, if you're the organization, you do have to decide, okay, how much time are we really willing to be on the hook left with this contract? Not just how many years are on it, but the guaranteed money to me is twofold. It seems to me that it's Stafford saying, hey, I plan on being, this dude for the next couple of years. And I feel good. And I had the best year in my recent couple of years of my career. And lifted this team, frankly, in ways that it probably wouldn't have been lifted without him. And also perhaps signaling I'm ready to continue to do that. And I feel like I can do that, versus a team that wasn't potentially actually thinking that maybe he would be in that headspace, because you look at the structure of this contract. Now, I'm not putting words in their mouth, but you look at the structure of the contract. If the guaranteed money runs out, you're basically like, we'll take whatever you've got and it's gravy, but we're not going to be on the hook for it. Right. So that's where I think the conversation stalls a little bit, is you have to figure out if you want him in your plans with that guaranteed money. You do structurally, you have the contract, but you have to figure out whether you want him in your plans to be on the hook for if something else does happen or come up at his age with the injury history. So I think that's where it gets a little complicated. Like I would say again, training camp is really when you're going to start to see this either escalate or de-escalate. I wouldn't call the spring an escalation necessary. I would call it a lack of progress, a stall. And I think you reopen that with a little bit more firepower, probably on either side, once training camp gets closer.
Yeah, I mean, he said it in his documentary, right? He wants to win Super Bowls. It seemed like he was extremely vocal about that, which was, I mean, I wouldn't say surprising, but I mean, just his commitment to the next 2-3 years with the Rams, I think is extremely important. And it's going to be technically an extension, right? Not a restructure if and when it does happen, right?
Well, there's precedent. There's precedent for a restructure that gives him guaranteed money. They did the same thing with Aaron Donald 2 years ago, or 2.5 to 2022, the spring after they won the Super Bowl. They basically ripped up his old contract and gave him the same time, but they put more guarantees on it. So there is precedent. And I am assuming that's what his camp is looking at, is the Rams themselves have set this precedent before.
Interesting. Wow, that's going to be really fun when it all kind of unfolds. And I guess in the next couple of months, by July, we'll have some actual concrete news. The other thing that I was really interested about in relation to the offense is Kyren Williams and Blake Corum, right? Like, we know Kyren Williams had to miss the first portion of OTAs with the foot injury, and he does kind of have a legitimate injury history over his very short career with the Rams thus far. But Kyren, I feel like he was really vocal about how he was thrilled about the Blake Corum pick, which, I mean, that's encouraging for Rams fans. But I'm just curious about how those two are going to coexist, and if you've seen that relationship between those two players kind of just expand upon itself thus far.
Yeah, well, first of all, I will say Kyren is the type of player who's going to bring people along with him. He's not the type of player who's going to hold anyone out of the room or be he's just a great dude. And he's also the type of player where he understands. I think he's realistic about the fact that if he does want to extend his own career as long as possible, he's going to need a break every once in a while. And I think there's also this sense of mature reality of the way everyone's sort of looking at this, which is he hasn't been available for a full season. And if you're a team and frankly, if you're a player and you're thinking, how can I best maximize my own body? And if you're a team and you're saying, how can we best maximize this star player who's emerged as like a bona fide dude? Like, how can we best maximize that? And it is bringing in somebody to share the workload. Now, in terms of a full carry split, I don't know. I think Sean McVay was kind of bitten, once bitten, twice shy a little bit about that after the Cam Akers, Darrell Henderson experiment didn't quite go the way that any of them wanted, inclusive to injuries and pitch counts and different types of things that just weren't a fit for those players. But I think like you have the ability to try these things now that Kyren is available. Not necessarily in OTAs. He was there for the install. He was doing like drills and stuff prior to that, but this last week was really, he was available for the minicamp install, which is huge. But now in training camp, you can try things with fully available players. You can figure out what type of rotation does work best. I don't know that you're going to see like anywhere really, if you have a bona fide, lead rusher, you probably are trying to always find that balance between you got to give them a break every once in a while, again, to extend the physical longevity through seasons that are getting longer and longer and longer. And then I would also say, like, this is a Rams team that has almost been overt about its intention that they believe they're going to be a playoff team. So if they believe they're going to be a playoff team, you don't want to have, you want to control everything you possibly can, inclusive to if your lead rusher has an injury, which he has for the last couple of years, and he's not available for whatever reason, you're not dealing with sort of the position catastrophe that they had at times last year when they were rotating through a bunch of different options at running back. And I know Darrell had a great, first game back with the Rams, but you can't, what I don't think people on the outside know is you can't really continue to do that with a player who hasn't been a part of your OTAs or your installs, because you're basically building one game plan for them, which you don't have the resources to do week over week over week. You have to stay within your structure. Right. But you also like teams key in on that, like one player could surprise them in the first week they're there. But if you don't have like a fully developed load of inventory in with that player that you installed during OTAs and in training camp, then you're only going to go by like a per game basis. And usually if you go by a per game basis, the second time you come out, especially on a Sean McVay team where everyone's watching the clips and gunning for him, you're going to be figured out. You're going to be solved. So that's where you want to make sure the transition from the lead rusher into the complementary rusher, but also into potentially the complementary rusher at some point having to be the lead rusher. You want to make sure that that's a seamless transition.
Yeah, it was pretty staggering how the offensive efficiency just plummeted as soon as Kyren Williams left the lineup. And you want to be able to have as much ammo right in your back pocket to be able to just kind of roll that out again. And I feel like him coming from a pro style offense, being able to execute the duo concepts as well as he does, plus the investment in the personnel up front, right? We call it 1,000 pounds of beef in the middle, which I think is a perfect segue over to Nick's question too about just Jonah Jackson and the way that he's kind of integrating into the offensive line at this point.
Yeah, just to kind of speak on what you were saying before that, Jourdan. Like if you are a playoff team, like if you think you're a playoff team going into it, yeah, you don't have to pick up a Darrell Henderson halfway through. You don't have to pick up a Carson Wentz, which is why I'm so happy that they went out and they got Jimmy G and then they drafted Blake. Like you're right on the money. But to go back to the offensive line, Jonah Jackson, has he been integrated into the offensive line? Like, has the chemistry been there? And how is Steve Avila like moving to center so far? How has that been from what you've seen?
Yeah, it's been fun. I'll start with Steve because I'm also left-handed and I love the left-handed center thing. I just think it's unique and it's cool. And somehow Matthew Stafford has a type where like now his last two centers have been lefties. He must Coleman like the ball pronates differently with a left-handed thrower. And so he must like the way that it spins into his hand, frankly. But Steve, it's been very cool. He is like the most lighthearted, personable, like wants to be around everybody, like comes and hangs with the media in the media room sometimes, like guy, like he is like a franchise player, right? Who is like, wants to just be involved in everything about the organization. He's bringing donuts to the business department in Agora Hills. Like
he's got a nose ring too. Is that true? He's got a whole new persona to him.
Oh, I haven't noticed that. I'm gonna have to give him shit for it if I see it. Good for you, Steve. I love it. I love it. You're gonna have to tape over that on game days, but yeah, it's like a horror show waiting to happen. But he just wants to be the thing that I think his personality is perfectly suited for that position, because he's in the mix. Like he wants to be, no pun intended, he's the center of everything. And he's so young. So to have that eagerness and encouragement from the people around him to continue to lean into those personality qualities, and then also the football IQ that he has is substantial. And again, he's kind of like goofy guy, like wants to joke around and all that stuff, but like there is a really bright football brain ticking away underneath that as well. And I think that that's what they see in him, and they're trying to push him and keep him uncomfortable without ruining his confidence. And so you build different lesson plans and you test him in different ways. The fact that Matthew Stafford is not holding out for more guarantees in his contract, in fact, he is in the building working with Steve every day. I cannot stress how important that has been. The fact that Ryan Wendell, the position coach, played center at such a high level for such a long time, cannot stress how important that is. We don't really know what it's going to look like until we actually see the pads go on with Steve, but they don't need him to be, the best center in the league right now. They don't even need him to feel like supremely comfortable at the position right now. They just need him to stack lessons and stack blocks together. He's got the size. He did cut a little bit of weight because he just wants to move a little bit better at the position. And like, he's a sponge. You hear him. I asked Sean this yesterday because I heard it. I was standing in the end zone like a creep, and I was listening to like all of the coaching and all the language and stuff. And I heard this. Sean was quizzing him on different calls, like between snaps. And he was like giving him sort of a pop quiz. If the mic does this, then what's the plan? Is there a change in the call if this player shifts to his right? And Steve, the first time he asked, Steve was like, "Are you asking me?" Because he was looking at Matthew as well as standing behind the center. And Sean was like, "Yes, I'm asking you." And Steve immediately had the answer. And then they just kept sort of like going through some of that recall work, which I thought was I think that's really important. And then Jonah Jackson, it's been cool. Like he's very chill guy, massive human, right? Just like abnormal, like it's very noticeable. Like Rob Havenstein used to be like this giant sequoia tree, just like towering over everybody. And now it's like, oh, there's Rob behind everyone else, everyone's they've definitely bulked up front as you guys know. And Jonah Jackson, everyone raves about how just easy to work with he is, how easy to get along with he is. He has been limited in some of the 11-on-11 and the 7-on-7 stuff just because he's still working back he had a late year injury last year. So he was in the install and seems to mesh really, really well. But yeah, it's very noticeable. We know that Matthew Stafford got skinnier last year. We called him Skinny Stafford because he'd go on the run and all that stuff. And he looks like very minute behind this line, I have to say. Yeah. So that's a good thing if you're, that's a good thing if you're the Rams.
Yeah, we don't need him benching 225.
Yeah, you don't need your quarterback taller than your O lineman. You just really don't need that. Yeah.
Between Skinny Stafford and then all of these running backs that are under 5'9", it's going to be really tough to be able to identify who's getting the ball and where they're going. Right?
Yeah, you know what I call it? I call it because the coordinators and Sean, they're all about the same height. So I call it. I don't mean it in a mean way. I call it we, not me. Like W-E-E.
That is a high quality pun. And I'm very, very glad you brought it to the table today. That's
one
good quality.
We, not me.
Yeah, we, not me.
Perfect for this show. All right, transitioning over to the defense, because in your most recent article, I was reading something that I thought just absolutely stood out amongst all the other great information. We saw that Nick Hampton was progressing well and looked ultra fast, as you described him, and is adding, I feel like him adding anything to the pass rush would be encouraging, considering he was actually drafted before Davis Allen and Puka in round 5. So is there a potential speed, power combination with Byron Young on that side, and then on the other side, potentially Michael Hoyt in rotation with a player like Jared Verse. I'm very curious about how that pass rush is going to kind of rotate as the season comes on.
Yeah, I think they're curious about that too, which is what OTAs are for, is to try to figure out what different combinations, particularly in a world now minus Aaron Donald, to find out what combinations are going to work the best. They're mixing their fronts a lot, which is good. I don't want to commit to saying that's how they'll do it in the season because it's OTAs, so it's very, very clear they're just working through different combinations. They've always done that, though. They've mixed their fronts up quite a bit and stayed versatile and kind of like malleable on the front there. But they also had Aaron Donald, who could play anywhere, so that makes it a little easier. The interesting thing is, I think there have been players on this team that Chris Shula has worked with before that have lent a speed, like a fastball element to the other pitches in the pass rush. And, you saw it in Samson Ebukam. You saw it in Obo Okoronkwo. Those players who weren't necessarily full-time players, who weren't even necessarily, 20 snap players, maybe, 7 to 12 snap guys, situationally speaking, in a rotation of other pass rushers, you can kind of see they are trying to just figure out what that could possibly look like, because you've got Jared Verse, who is a massive human. Byron Young got taller somehow. I thought people are done growing at 26, but I digress. And like he's still working on developing more versatility in his tools and trying to just figure out the equations of the rush. He's in his second year, and Jared Verse kind of came into this first round pick. He kind of came into this like pretty pro ready. And so figuring out how to complement those guys with guys who do different things. I would say Michael Hoyt's more of a power guy. And so you're trying to think about, okay, what does that look like? And then you're also thinking about like, well, you have Jared Verse who can play odd fronts, which they've said they will stay an odd front team, but he can also play in even fronts. And he can also play that like long coveted and not quite ever found like 4-eye position that you just sometimes, like Morgan Fox played that pretty well near the end of his time in LA. And so I think, you're looking for combinations of the edges for sure, but you're also looking for rotation and sub package work and just different speed to power that you won't necessarily get speed to power in one person like you did with Aaron, but you can mathematically align different people in different places. And if you as a coordinator are picking the correct spots to deploy them, along with picking the right partners in the middle to disrupt enough to allow that combination to unfold and manifest, like that's where you could really find something interesting. But it's about OTAs is all about trying to understand what it actually is a player is capable of, not just physically because the pads aren't on, so nothing is truly real, but mentally what they're capable of stacking together, what moves they're using, how they're deploying their hands, what their feet look like, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Dean, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Nick. I know you have another question really.
Just so I'm like with all the, with the new veterans, with like Cam Curl, Trey White, Darius Williams, like all kind of rotating at the star. Is there like a level of comfort from Shula and the defensive coaching staff with those guys like now in the building?
Yeah, I would say the two players who've rotated at star are Russ Yeast and Darion Kendrick, but I think they were more trying to figure out a role for Darion, like figure out like, okay, what could he potentially do? Where do we need depth? He played on the outside. And so what potentially could he do something else? If you're not necessarily, penciled in as a starter at this point, you have to be able to do multiple things. And so I think I'm intrigued by Russ Yeast at the star. You guys are aware of my limitations of in any media, credential media limitations on reporting schematic things. But Chris Shula, I asked him directly about this and he kind of gave me the look like, come on, and then actually played ball, which was nice. He expanded on like, it seems to be like Russ Yeast is going to be like, it might be something they're trying to see what he's capable of in that star role. It's ultra important, as you guys know, in this offense. Quentin Lake and Cam Curl have been the safeties, which is also really intriguing. I liked Quentin Lake on some of the short yardage stuff when he played dime linebacker. He started dime linebacker, played really well there, and then expanded into sort of an altered version of what they call their star that was more so a big nickel, buffalo nickel kind of a position. The star does just a little bit different things. When you have Darius Williams and Kobe Durant, who they clearly by the end of last year wanted to move back to the outside. And then you're getting back a healthy Trey White. I think you could actually handicap the starting secondary like pretty simply, just looking at it on paper. But the key will be, okay, how many positions really might Trey White be able to play for them when he gets back? Because he's capable of doing a lot of things. And that was some of the buzz on him when the Rams were courting him. And then also, can Russ really step in and really own that star role? And then, can Kobe Durant take another step forward in his development as an outside corner? I think those are my big questions going into training camp.
Yeah, I mean, there's no Jalen Ramsey right at the star any longer, right? So you really need somebody that understands the defense, right, and could probably call a majority of the defense if a player like Ernest Jones is off the field. I feel like it's just such an important position, but it feels like all the money right now in terms of how the defense and how the money is allocated is all catered around the secondary, guys like Cam Curl, Trey White, Darius Williams. So it's such an important piece, right? That back end, as the pass rush kind of continues to develop and is so extremely young. I'm almost curious if there's like a nickname or something that we're giving this young front seven. We were talking about Donald's kids yesterday on Twitter. We were just trying to figure out like what this could actually look like when it all kind of comes to fruition. But that secondary is just going to be so extraordinarily important. So a guy like Russ Yeast, even him being like an underdog, a guy that people need to kind of keep their eyes on, I feel like it's so important moving forward. And now, like with special teams, like we're also just
my favorite topic. Yes. My favorite topic.
Talk about allocating money to a place. Zero allocated towards special teams. But D, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, but Chase Blackburn, right? He's back for his second year, and Jeremy Springer, I thought he was the favorite to eventually get the job, but Chase Blackburn took it over, and he has such a big responsibility. His role is so extremely important towards the success of the team in 2024. All three, teams, all three sides have to be working in collaboration in order for this all to work the way they needed to in 2024. How are the Rams going about practicing the new kickoff rule? And is Jared Verse actually going to return kicks?
He'd have to duke it out with Michael Hoyt. I think Hoyt wants to get his hands on that role a little bit
Rams fans would go nuts if that were actually the case.
He's just nuts enough to try it too, I think. But no, I think that was more Jared Verse just wants to get on the field by any means necessary. So that's good. That's good quality you want from a rookie. But it's interesting. So I know Chase Blackburn gets a lot of heat, rightfully so. It was a horrendous special teams unit last year. We all saw it, unfortunately. And then I also think, though, that the way that the Rams previously practiced special teams was very attuned to having veteran experts at the key positions, and not so much at player development or multi-level development, and just in the time allocation of what was allocated to those types of drills and that type of install in practice, versus, okay, you have a lot of really young players that you need to develop on offense and defense. So you can't necessarily be allocating that much time to special teams in every single practice, because you need them to get your offense down. You need them to get your defense down. Like, you need to teach them offensive and defensive drills at the NFL level for the first time. And so that was really tough. I think that was really where you saw the youth of this roster in its truest element last year. And you also saw, I think, Sean McVay have a really sort of like come to Jesus moment with himself, frankly, because his hiring of Stretch this offseason as the game management coordinator, who's also doing a lot of work with special teams. That to me was very telling, almost the admittance without actually admitting it, that like his fourth down decision-making is of prehistoric times at this point. And he needed to be better, he needed to be better. And he needed to have somebody who, if you're a head coach and especially your play calling head coach, you actually, it's not that you don't want to do some of this stuff and invest in some of it. You do not have time. Like, you literally don't have time in some cases without somebody like Stretch in your building, disseminating vast quantities of information and parceling into the types of things that a coach would actually do for a player, and helping a player understand sort of a new lane or a different area than previously considered. And so I think all of those things kind of collided at one time, inclusive to some of the fourth down decision-making, the kicker carousel that I think, I agree with Sean. He admitted this. I agree with him that sometimes the kicker was put in a really terrible position, also not identifying the correct kicker. I think you can, at this point, agree that it would have been fiscally unsound based on the rest of the build of the team and the roster allocation and the dead money last year to have paid significant money to a kicker, but you still have to identify the right one, right? You have to put him in the right position. So we love, multiple things being true. I just think it was a lot of different things that took a long look in the mirror that weren't necessarily all the fault of the new special teams coordinator. However, I do think Sean mentioned this at the end of the season, that he and Chase had like a pretty significant meeting about kind of all of this stuff. And like and even down to like how they potentially could structure practice to help with development in that phase and actual installation of plays and concepts and different things on punt and kickoff return and those types of situational things that stretch will be absolutely crucial in understanding. You also had to go and build back up the resources. Getting Alex Ward back, the long snapper, healthy after he was out. I mean, that was a scary thing that he went through. And then having a kicker who is like crazy accurate and like could probably tackle someone if he needed to. I don't know. Sean kind of has a kicker type, I think, when the guys that actually work well, like he kind of has a type. And so it really, like, you have to invest, and you can't just invest at the kicker spot and everything's magically fine. You have to also invest in a time allocation. So what I've seen in practice through OTAs is actually more time. I mean, and this is something I noticed right away, but you have to build up data. Like, I wanted to attend all the OTAs before actually making a conclusion here. Like, they are spending more time on special teams. There is more time carved into practice. I understand why they couldn't last year. And I understand when you have veterans like Johnny Heckers of the world and Jake McQuaid's and Greg Zuerlein, like when you have those guys, you actually don't need to worry about that so much because they're also coaching and doing that. But when you have a bunch of young guys and you also need to develop offense and defense, you need to devote time in practice to do that, time on task to do that, time in meeting rooms to do that. And there's only so much time players are allowed to be in the buildings. So it is very it's a nuanced thing because yes, they were atrocious in that phase. At the same time, looking behind the scenes a little bit, you can kind of see why. And also importantly, it seems that they're at least trying to take steps to rectify that. The new kickoff is going to be nuts for everyone. I mean, it's cool. I like it. I don't know what it's going to look like at full speed yet in contact, but like so far it seems really fun and really interesting. And the joint practices that the Rams have set up against the Chargers and the Cowboys and the Texans, that's actually going to be the best training ground for that kickoff because you don't want to show your plans for it in the preseason. You're going to practice it, but just like everything else, you're going to be very vanilla with what you show because you don't want anyone else to get an advantage with that preseason tape. And instead, you're going to be doing all that stuff in joint practices. And Sean even mentioned, he's like, yeah, we try not to play against practice against teams that we're going to be playing in the season because they don't want them to know. They don't want them to have any of that information. So I do think it's smart. Teams that are doing joint practices, particularly this year, I think are ahead. So that's significant.
I would be fine if they just did the new kickoff in all those joint practices. Like, let's spend 3 hours every single day. And then off to the side, we'll continue to practice the way that we're used to practicing without identifying, the playbook and the offensive scheme and all that good stuff. But yeah, no, it's so interesting. And Joshua Carty, to your point, 6'2", 210 pounds, could make some tackles. And this is also why Sean McVay goes number 1 in your overall draft, right? Because he's so self-aware. He's continuously learning. He's continuously growing. And he understands that, at times he needs help. He needs a little bit of brain power in the building.
Yeah, sometimes it takes him.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes him hitting a little bit of a rock bottom in terms of scheme or whatever 2022 was. But he does get there eventually. He tries to push forward. And I don't think he's averse to listening to what he gets wrong, which is important.
Yeah. Also, Jordan, just at any point, if you want to start calling Josh Gentle Josh, I've been trying to coin that as like a cool nickname. I don't know how cool it sounds. But
Josh Carty, Gentle Josh, like because he's a giant.
Yeah.
Oh, got it. Yeah. I was like, God. I don't know. I have barely met him, so I don't know. Yeah.
I've heard a lot of Cardi B as well.
I met his parents in Mobile. His parents are so rad. They're awesome. They were all decked out in Stanford. Like, you have to be such a devoted parent if you are going to the Senior Bowl to watch your child kick Like, not just that you're going to the Senior Bowl, right? But like that you are going to the Senior Bowl to watch your child kick. Like, it's just not done. So I appreciated that. They were really great. I said, hey, the Rams need a kicker. And his mom said, that's where we want him to go. So it was a pretty cool full circle moment.
Just to close this out, like what player or players do you feel like you may be like pleasantly surprised with this year? You know, we have Davis Allen and Russ Geese circled, but are there guys that look like kind of different or more ready than this time last year? Yeah,
I definitely would point at Davis Allen. I'd like to see. I'm curious with Russ. I have no questions about the mental side for him. Zero questions. That dude is very bright. I do wonder about, that's a really physical position. When the pads come on, I just, I'm curious to see what it looks like, but the mental side of it, I have no question about. Nick Hampton is another one where I'm curious to see how they work him in, because I do see shades of Obo and shades of Samson Ebukam in that space. And then I would say, I always hesitate to do this because the fantasy football people, they get really mad if it doesn't pan out. And I'm sorry in advance if it doesn't pan out. And it's really hard, like caveat. It is so hard to crack this roster in the receiving core. Especially you have like Demarcus Robinson, who is like aging in reverse at this point. And like him and Stafford look phenomenal together out there at practice in terms of their connection. But Jordan Whittington is just someone that I just think Rams fans should keep an eye on. The offense that he learned under Sark, Sean goes out there all the time. Sark's his guy. Like that, he goes out there all the time and they talk through football, and Sark's out here all the time to talk. Like he's at OTA, every once in a while you'll see him at OTAs and like clinicking and doing all that stuff. And there's a lot of really similar language in what Texas recently has been running and what Sean runs. And so I think that gives Jordan a leg up because he also did it for a long time there. Yeah. He got a bit overshadowed, I think, by some of the like blue chip guys that came in and like the transfers and all of that. But when they were looking into just different players to add to their complementary roles there, and it's not saying that he's necessarily going to crack the rotation, but you never know. We didn't think Puka necessarily would. We saw the mental workload in OTAs, but it was opportunity because Cooper was hurt that really got him into the lineup.
It's true.
And then DeMarcus, they really needed, people started catching on to Puka. DeMarcus wasn't even on the field for the first half of the season.
Yeah, it was all
teams. Yeah, and teams started really catching on to what Puka was doing and trying to defend him in different ways. And you needed a true X to emerge. And they loved what DeMarcus was doing in practice. And so they put him on the field and it just was gangbusters after that. And so it's all about opportunity. So I would say this, if there is a player who, given the chance, would maximize that opportunity, I would say it would be Jordan Whittington.
Wow, I love that. I'm wondering too, his value that he could potentially add in terms of special teams too. Maybe as a kick returner, he's a big slot player.
Boston Scott will be is a really cool, under the radar, cool ad for them on special teams. Yeah,
totally forgot about that. The giant killer.
And I love the Texas connection too, right? Because Les's stepson is there in Texas, and Les is very inclusive with the program, and so Sean, like it all makes sense as to why Jordan Whittington fell into their lap. So I absolutely love that. And lastly, as we're closing out, what's next for Jordan? You're just like Sean McVay. Everything you touch since you've been to Los Angeles turns to gold. So we're really curious about what kind of teasers you have or any projects that you're working on that you'd like to share.
Well, I'm lucky to be in a cool environment, and like people are you guys are the fan base is curious, right? Because that's just the nature of what this team dynamic is they're always trying stuff. And so it's been like a, not to be cheesy, it's been like a safe place for me to also try stuff and to learn and grow and to like, F up sometimes, but then to keep like growing and all of that. So that's been cool as a human for me to be in this environment. And the Rams have a pretty open door policy about certain things. And so, you've just gotten to learn and to grow. And so for me, I'm excited. I sort of started this last year with the Play Callers podcast series, but I'm expanding a little bit. You will not be missing Rams coverage from me, Rams fans. I get this question a lot. I am going to be covering your team, but I'm also working on broader projects as well for our NFL vertical. So it could be a wide variety of topics, and I got a couple cool ones cooking right now that I'm really excited about that if you like football, hopefully you'll continue to follow along with those. And I appreciate you guys having me on my show. I really miss talking to the people. I really miss speaking words coming out of my mouth, not writing them. I miss actually connecting with the fans.
You're so good at it. I mean, it's our pleasure to have you on, but I mean, just like reading your writing, you illustrate, you bring everything to life. And I know Rams fans are just so appreciative of coverage that they feel like they've never had, right? Taking you inside the building, taking you to, a player's personality and every single detail in between. We could not appreciate it more as two huge Rams fans. And I know that the entire Rams nation is genuinely appreciative of every single thing you do. So we're so excited for all your future projects.
Thank you. The feeling is very mutual. I appreciate you saying that, but I am always I'm trying to get better. I got a long way to go before I'm at where I want to be. So I'm just trying to get reps, guys. I'm carving out more special teams time. Like, I'm just trying to get reps and to grow and develop. So
hey, you're like fun. Sean. You're just like Sean. And this podcast could use a stretch too sometimes. So you're welcome to join us whenever you'd like.
Yeah, I need a life coach stretch. I need a stretch strike in. I need a life coach like that. So maybe he can help out with that a little bit.
I love it.
Decision making.
Personally, Jourdan, thank you for making the dog days of summer just so much better when there's just nothing. I don't want to watch the Dodgers at 1 p.m. You know what I mean? Like, I just want football coverage from my team. And I mean, the whole year, but seriously, thank you. We really appreciate it. Speaking as a Rambassador, as they say, as Taron Killam has coined.
I love that guy. And thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it. It's always I'm just a call away. I'll be on anytime. So you guys just hit me up. This is always a joy. We have a good time doing it. So It'll be fun.
Yes. So much fun. Jourdan, thank you. And we will definitely chat with you soon.